Good morning, everyone. I'm Sophie Yohanan, clinical scientist at Galvanize Therapeutics. I'm also a clinical research instructor and a mentor. I am also the host for this month's LinkedIn audio discussion, Clinical Trials OBQ, One Burning Question. As we get started, a few LinkedIn audio helpful hints. This year, we've transitioned from our previous Clubhouse programming to our new platform, LinkedIn Audio, to essentially go where our audience is. We're very pleased with LinkedIn Audio as our new home. As you can see, everyone has been sourced here. Please take this time to use the invite button at the bottom of your screen to invite your friends and colleagues to this event. If you have a lot of followers and want to narrow the search, you can use words like clinical trials or research. For those of you who can't stay or would like to listen to the conversation later or share it as a podcast, Tia Romero, who you see at the top of your screen here, relationship manager, she will be archiving it, and I will include a link in my summary post after the conversation. Okay. As well as in our Clinical Trials One Burning Question LinkedIn group. Feel free to join our group later on as I post the link if you're interested. Feel free to tap on profiles, follow me and all of our moderators and panelists here today, and be sure to check out and follow others in the room where inspired. We do encourage audience participation when we get to that portion of the program. Today is going to be an interview style setup between Jennifer and our guest speaker, Kristin Smedley here. It's going to be a very special discussion, so we will reserve audience time for the second half of the program. You will also see the emoji button at the bottom of your screen. You can use that to respond if you want to join but are not prepared to speak. Once on stage, you can slow tap your mic to indicate that you wish to speak, and you can use your emojis to express yourself, as Michael is demonstrating right now. And you can see that we have a couple who have raised their hand, so they will be brought up at that portion. And you can see that Scott has used the emoji as well. So now I'd like to turn the mic over to Michael Young to introduce himself and share information on our sponsor, Consuli.
Thanks, Sophie. Appreciate that. My name is Michael Young, and I'm a life sciences C-suite consultant, and I work at the intersection of clinical strategy and commercialization. I support today's sponsor, Consuli.net, as a fractional CMO, and I'm very happy to note that several members of the Consuli team are also in our audience here. For those of you who don't know Consuli, broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company. It's a B Corp with a mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. We do quite a bit of work on the patient recruitment side of things, and we do this because experts suggest that our individual health data is worth around $20,000 per year to ourselves for that data that is being shared. Consuli helps people who choose to get access to and how to participate, how their personal information is used, and if and when desired, to get them paid for their data as they enroll in trials and participate in other information gathering. This is all obviously designed to help make medicine better and to provide better benefits to patients. Consuli does this by operating a marketplace for members where Consuli becomes their agent, and members receive smart-matched, individualized offers from Consuli for opportunities including the ability to participate in clinical trials and data trials. There's no cost to join the Consuli movement, and you can learn more at Consuli, that's CONSULI.net. And I want to make sure to say hello to the rest of our panel. We are waiting for a couple, I think it's only Kristin, who is not here yet. We will ping her shortly here, but absolutely, this is a tremendous assembly of expertise here, and the co-mods are really designed to help guide the conversation. And in particular today, Jennifer Bonfrisco is going to help us specifically with our special guest, Kristin Smedley. Just real quickly here, note to you that among our group, we have Scott Schliebner, and many of you may know Scott. He's developed quite a reputation in the industry, specifically in the arena of orphan and rare diseases. And he has served as a board member and a strategic advisor, investor, and consultant to several e-clinical technology startups. I will want to make sure to note that Sophie has, as she just briefly introduced herself, she really is an amazing clinical scientist, instructor, mentor, and bioethics enthusiast. We wouldn't be able to operate this clinical trials OBQ without her expertise and help. So thanks, Sophie. In the background, and you'll hear from her a little bit later, Taya Romero is joining us, and she is truly an active creator. She gets involved in a number of areas, including a passion of hers with neurodiversity and inclusion, and she serves in an important project management role with a good-sized CRO that works in this arena. And Edye Edens is on board. I can't believe we haven't heard anything from Edye at this point, but Edye is actually a member of First Class Solutions. She is an attorney with an outstanding reputation in the arena of compliance and certainly the all legal happenings around the clinical trial world. And lastly, we'll have Kristin introduce herself when she comes on board here. But thanks to the efforts of Jennifer Bonfrisco, who has over 30 years working in R&D and pharma with CROs and academia, we have a wonderful guest today. So, Jennifer, thank you so much for all the work that you've done to help put this together. So I'll come back to, let's see here. I want to make sure that we're following along here. Jennifer, I think it's okay. I think, Jennifer, I'll hand off to you here so we can get into the program.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you, everybody. So I wanted to, I think a lot of people here happen to know my dear friend, Kristin Smedley, and I'm going to hand it over to her pretty quickly. But I think we didn't really, I don't think she needs me introducing her because, she's pretty comfortable on most stages. But we wanted to kind of, the purpose of today's talk, as anyone who's been on any of our other discussions, we've really been focusing a lot on different topics concerning diversity, making clinical trials more accessible. We coined that phrase JEDI, which is justice, diversity, inclusion, and equity. Sorry, I left the equity out. And so, we all come to it from a slightly different approach, but all of us are working within clinical research and thinking about it from different aspects. So the reason I wanted to tackle this particular topic is because I've been working for several years in ophthalmology. And a lot of the tools that we did within ophthalmology, I realized, for ophthalmology studies are certainly applicable to all studies. And, we're all working hard to get enrollment and finding ways to reach more patients. And the hot topic at every conference now is diversity. And so not only are we interested in it because we're interested in having more diverse patient populations, we're also interested in it because it's good for science. It's good for our data, and it's good for business because it helps to expedite trials. And so while we were thinking about this, I think my friend Edye and I coined the other title of "We're Forgetting About the Large D in Diversity." And by that, we're talking about disabled. And that's a big general topic in itself, disabled. So we thought, let's think about people that are have visual disabilities, blind and visually impaired patients. And that's what we kind of wanted to talk about a little bit today. So again, one of the things I want to just narrow down on, though, is that I think while we talk about diversity and we think about broadening protocols, the one thing that is very, very important for us all to keep in mind is that clinical trials are indeed research trials, right? We're trying to explore doing an experiment on a new chemical entity. So it is important that we keep that in mind when designing the protocol, right? That we have the right, we're approaching the right patients, and that they're enrolled with the purpose of proving our objective ultimately, so that we can get a drug to the market and then reach masses of patients. So sometimes, it doesn't, a trial is not applicable for every single person. But however, what about when it can? And certainly when you're thinking about patients that are maybe issues with their vision, and they get cancer or heart disease, and they fit the medical criteria, we sure should make it easier to get them in our trials. So that's kind of where we wanted to talk about today. So I'm going to pass it over to Kristin. She can introduce herself. She comes to it from a slightly different angle, but all of her knowledge is surely applicable to clinical. I also think we have some great people in the audience, so I'm going to kind of quiet it down a bit so that we have time to hear from some more people. So Kristin, I pass it over to you.
Hey, and I caught it. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you everybody for putting this together. And I got to tell you, I'm a little bit of a nerd. I got tears in my eyes over the fact that you all are addressing this topic at this point, because trying to get this news story about blindness into the world, and somebody said to me the other day, Kristin, isn't it hard to turn the Titanic around? This old story of blindness and inaccessibility and all of the things that we typically think about with blindness and visual impairment and non-achievement, unemployment, all those things. It's not the true story of what the world is for people that are blind and visually impaired, or can be if we all get on board and start telling the news story that we're putting out in the world. And you guys are like, trailblazers here with me. I'm like, I was so excited to be a part of this group, because this old story of blindness, you think about it. When I came into the blind community, I had never met a blind person until the year 2000. 23 years ago was the first time I met somebody that was blind. And it happened to be my newborn son, my firstborn, Michael. At 4 months old, I was told that he had Leber's congenital amaurosis. He would never live a normal life. He would probably not go to regular school. Actually, my first question to the doctor, don't judge me on this, I was a young mom and I was very scared. My first question was, would he play baseball? I had no idea what a blind person would ever be able to do, as I'm certain, based on the statistics in this world of unemployment and underachievement, most people don't know what a blind person can do. But I can tell you this, what I want to make sure that if nothing else, that I leave you all with this image in your head. You probably have an image of a blind person, sunglasses, like what is the movies told us? Dark glasses, sitting on a couch, in a house, dim room, sad, depressed, right? That's what all of the Hollywood has told us about blindness. The image I want you to have in your head is a good-looking kid with a big, beautiful smile, standing in a blue Penn State cap and gown, with a medal around his neck for achieving the top 0.5% of 10,000 graduates, and more braids around his neck than I can even count for the summa cum laude achievement, 2 majors, 2 minors, and a certificate program done in 4 years. I want you to have that image in your mind when you think about blindness, because that is my Michael. 23 years later, graduated Penn State with all those accolades, and he's working his dream job. So as we talk now, moving into this, I will acknowledge that it's an interview. I tend to go off on my own. As we move through this conversation today, the image of Michael as the pinnacle of success that we all strive to be when we go through college, that's the image that I want in your mind when you're thinking about how to do protocols and things with blind and visually impaired patients.
Yeah, thank you. So we wanted to, Kristin and I, obviously, we're sort of neighbors and we're friends. So we talked a little bit about some ideas about, of course, her children, she has 2 boys that are blind, and they are like, rock stars. You can't believe what they can get accomplished. So with that in mind, we started talking about, look, when you have people like Michael who can do anything, does that mean, there still certainly are challenges. Mm-hmm. So, like, what are some of the challenges when you think about trials? We're thinking about transportation issues. Do you want to touch upon that?
Yeah. I mean, and it's real. You're right. They've accomplished a lot, but there are just certain things. So in terms of transportation, what you got to think about is, it as much as my son navigated Penn State's campus, he's now living, he works at Disney, he's navigating Orlando, Florida. It takes a lot of bandwidth. It takes extra bandwidth for a person that is blind to travel. It just is what it is. And, whether it's a Uber ride and figuring out, when you're dropped off where the door is, or if it's a bus, then a train. So the least amount of friction that you can have for that patient to get from home or office to your location. And honestly, if you're building in everything for your budgets for clinical trials, I would say the gold star, the top, would be just build in to have an Uber pick up, a ride share. Somebody go pick the folks up so that by the time they get to your facility, they're not already, cutting into all that bandwidth that they use in a day that might be a little more than you and I use.
Yeah, and the other thing that we were thinking about is, look, I know in clinical trials we do Ubers, we do ride shares all the time, but Kristin, you had brought up the concept of, okay, what do they do when they get dropped off? Most of us have a hard time finding their way around Penn or MD Anderson. Like, what then? Like, I think that's part of it. Like, or think about all of us as monitors when you're trying to find your room, where to go. We're confused. So I personally, as an ops person, I haven't always thought about that. I'm like, well, they have the Uber, but yeah, we have to do more to make sure that they know exactly where to go and the logistics once they get there.
Yeah. And honestly, it really, with someone that is blind or visually impaired, it comes down to communication. The more you can communicate on the front end, the easier and smoother and less stressed out everybody ends up, right? So even just a communication of, okay, let's stay in contact, and when the Uber arrives, so-and-so will be at the door. Somebody will come out to meet you. I mean, those kinds of things. Just think about all the communication that you can do in advance.
Speaking of communication, Kristin, Jennifer, what about our quality of life questionnaires, our patient-facing documents, consent forms, those kinds of things that we deal with regularly in clinical trials when it comes to a visually impaired patient? How can we increase access? How can we level the playing field for them?
I love that you just said that, because that's a tagline in my new short film, Level the Playing Field. Honestly, it comes down to accessibility in whether you're doing stuff online. If you got, I had my film premiere event the other night, right? I actually was faced with this situation. Blind people were coming. I'm like, oh my gosh, I guess I got to get all of the schedule and all of the handouts that were in the bags and in the gift bags all brailled. And my partner at Thriving Blind Academy said to me, Kristin, everyone's so used to the QR code now. Put a QR code on there and have everything online, because a successful blind person that is out there in the world doing their thing has accessibility features built into whether it's their laptop, their phone, it's talking to them. They have all different programs that they use that they're familiar with. So when you get stuff online, just a Word document online, as opposed to having paper things, so much easier. And honestly, whatever your first step is of these folks coming to you, if it's a website, if it's a text, I don't know how you're recruiting folks, but everything just has to be accessible. You have to get the accessibility consultants come in and look at your website and make sure if there's pictures that they have description. If you're recruiting through social media, make sure those pictures have alt text. Videos have descriptions. Everything that you can think about from that user, a blind user experience, a blind patient experience from beginning to end, making, the more barriers you can remove, the more engagement you're going to get.
Can you give us an example, Kristin? I'm listening to you. I know what you're talking about, but posted recently, I didn't understand. So can you give us an example?
You mean like of alt text?
Yes, please.
Yeah, it's actually very simple. Now, Facebook does a lot of this on its own. I don't know why all the other platforms haven't yet, but you go in, let's just say you're posting a picture about, it's a JPEG about a clinical trial you have coming up and you're recruiting people. If there's text on that picture, for the most part, Facebook will have alt text already there. But what you do is you go into the picture and you'll see in accessibility, on Instagram, it's called accessibility. You go in and it gives you a spot for alt text. On Facebook, I believe on the computer, it just alt text pops up that you can put it in there. LinkedIn is a little nutty with this still. If you put a picture on from your phone, it doesn't give you an opportunity on LinkedIn to put in alt text. If you do it on the laptop or your desktop, you do see it. And all you do is put a picture description. If there's words on that JPEG, you type them in to alt text. If it's a person doing something, you describe it. It doesn't have to be an insanely lengthy thing. I mean, blind folks are scrolling through as fast as we are with stuff. Some people do put tons of descriptions. My son's friends, they put interesting things in their alt text because they know only the Michael's their only blind friend that's going to use that, right? But that alone, and Twitter has it too, by the way. That alone breaks down that whole barrier of accessibility, and you get a ton of engagement from people that are blind.
And the other thing that's really interesting, so I think most people, well, not everybody know this, but we call these things PROs, and they're outcomes that the patients will see. They can, the forms they can see, like diaries. So exactly that. We have to think ahead of time. If we're going to have a lot of diaries or forms that these patients need, we have to deal with that ahead of time. But it's interesting because Kristin had this movie premiere in our town this week, and it was phenomenal. And one of the things that she's saying is she previewed this short film, and I'd never seen this before, Kristin, where they had the verbal, they were describing the pictures. So it's like, you have to see it on screen, right? Because you have it on LinkedIn now, but it's like they show an image of a college, and they just explain it. It's interesting. I'd never seen that before.
Yeah, that's called audio description, and actually, I'll reshare the trailer of the film. It has the audio description in it, and you can hear, like in the very beginning, there's a drone that flies up over the city of Denver, and you hear this woman say, scene of a sunny morning, yeah, and flying over Denver with trees, and she just describes it real quick, and then it goes into the film, and it's the way audio description is laid into the film. It doesn't interrupt actors speaking or anything like that.
It's really cool. Yeah.
Wow.
Like that.
Yeah, it was funny. We watched the whole movie with that, and I forgot to even announce it to the crowd that that's how we were going to watch it, and it was magnificent to watch people's faces that, that's how. I mean, Netflix has it on almost every show that my boys watch on there.
And honestly, after a minute, it felt normal. And I was like, at first I was like, what is this? But then
you get used to it. You get accustomed to it, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, Edye, we have 5 minutes left I want to give Edye a chance to jump in here as our compliance expert and weigh in on some of the things that you've been describing as options for increasing access to visually impaired patients. Can we do that right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I welcome ideas from you, Kristin, as I talk through this. So this is Edye. And for me, when we think about this, so from the regulatory infrastructure, we do have some protected vulnerable populations that we're all likely familiar with. Maybe some of us on the line don't know which ones are formally regulatorily protected versus just protected because an IRB sees a need. But there are some classifications, like being a child or a minor, like being a incarcerated individual, prisoner, like being a pregnant woman or a neonate, that we view as particularly vulnerable, and we protect them under the common rule that regulates IRBs. Similarly, we see vulnerable populations protected and defined relatively the same way in the FDA regulations that often oversee the types of work that we're doing in these drugs and device research. And what folks don't always realize is the IRBs, which the FDA is relying on the IRBs are actually not just tasked with enforcing the vulnerable populations of those individual regulated areas. What you see is IRBs will step up when they're doing it and doing it well, and a lot of them do, and really work hard to represent particular patient populations that may in other ways be deemed vulnerable. Even if the regulations don't formally provide that protection, the IRB is in no way thwarted from doing it on their own account. So I've seen this done in hearing impaired populations. I've seen where we're doing research exclusively and it wasn't that the research was on the hearing impaired, it was just, it happened to be in a patient population that we recognized was hearing impaired. And so we were recruiting a large quantity of that patient population. So because of that, we took extra steps. And when we talk about the extra steps that are taken once the IRB decides there might be a vulnerability in a patient population present, like I said, whether that's hearing, visual impairment, maybe it's socioeconomic, education, cognitive impairment, there are a number of these things that aren't protected, quote unquote, by the regulations. But what we do in IRB land is we bring in appropriate individuals who are, some type of a practitioner or specialist in that particular vulnerability population, patient population, and we give them an opportunity to represent that population before the IRB as decisions are made about ways to make that trial fair, just, non-coercive, safe, and frankly, accessible, right? But we need that representation. That's the key. And a lot of folks don't know, when I was talking about this with Jennifer, she was asking, how would an IRB see this and how would we be looking at certain ways to heighten that protection? IRBs very often employ consultants who aren't going to come to every meeting. They're going to come when they're called. And that would be what I would say they could use in a situation like this. And I think that honestly, we're seeing an emergence of this focus on all the different elements of diversity, including disability, because I know, and many of us in this crowd are attending it here in May, there's going to be a talk coming up where we actually are having, I forget who's hosting it, but they're having and a member of the Office for Human Research Protections actually come speak to, and it's free, I'm looking up on my calendar as I'm talking, to a host of us. It's an HCCA SCCE webinar. So both organizations, HCCA and SCCE, are sponsoring it. And they're having a member of that Office for Human Research Protections who oversees IRB activities come talk to us about how are we going to promulgate diversity in the IRBs, and what are the new expectations now that we have guidance coming out from the FDA and other regulatory agencies and influencing bodies about considering and enabling and making research more accessible for these diverse populations. So the timing couldn't be better for these conversations in that regard. I'm going to park it there. If folks have more questions about the regulatory, I'm always happy to answer them, but I also know that we're coming up on time where we want to move forward in our discussion.
It's so much. I really wanted a chance to speak. He is our resident glaucomaniac. Thank you so much, Richie, for joining. I know your time is short. Jump right in.
Thanks so much, Sophie, and really appreciate the invite. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. For those I haven't had the pleasure of meeting or introducing myself to yet, I'll give you the short version. My name is Richie. I'm a clinical researcher for the last 13 years. Back in 2019, I was actually working in ophthalmology when I found out that I myself am going blind due to a rare and orphan condition called Wolfram syndrome. So was not born visually impaired, had a lot of learning to do right? Admittedly, I didn't understand that blindness and vision loss is a spectrum. And one of the things I spend a lot of time thinking about now is accessibility, right? How we make clinical trials more accessible for a variety of impairments. You know, you might have visual impairments, you may have cognitive impairments, perhaps mobility issues. When I think about blindness and visual impairment and accessibility for clinical trials, it could be a perfect example. I myself live in Durham, North Carolina. I'm 4 blocks away from Duke University Medical Center. Nobody wants me driving because my particular flavor of vision loss, I can't actually trust what I see, right? So if I had to drive those 4 blocks to Duke, I couldn't read an intersection accurately. If I did get a lovely ride from Uber or Lyft and I got dropped off at the front of that academic medical center, it would take me forever if I actually made it there to the actual research office. So knowing that there's a whole lot to learn here, I would really encourage everyone looking to learn more and to educate themselves about what the visually impaired may need for clinical trial, to do just that, to actually ask them questions, to talk to them, to learn about unmet needs, quality of life impacts, and preferences. Because vision loss and blindness really is a spectrum, and you know, what I need might not be what Kristin's kids need. So I just wanted to make that point, Sophie, before I have to drop. But fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for organizing.
Just one example, Richie, of what you would like to see. Imagine you are a participant in a new clinical trial today. You are walking into the clinic. What would you like to see that was going to make it easier for you to understand, feel comfortable to participate, consent, enroll, follow through, and feel supported as a participant?
Great question. Yeah, I'll focus on the consent portion. There is a lot of traction in regards to e-consent, electronic consent, and there is so much possibility there in terms of accessibility. We have the chance right now, the opportunity to go from an electronic version of a paper document, a PDF, to something that's accessible for everybody, right? So I would like to see audio, video, so I don't have to rely on technology that hopefully lets me pinch and zoom in to read 38 pages of single-spaced jargon, right? For me personally, accessibility for consent would let me actually listen to that patient-friendly informed consent document, not have to read it and give myself a headache probably.
I think that's interesting, Rich, that you say that. I mean, I actually just hung up this morning on a call where we're trying to do video informed consents. I think it's applicable, obviously, not only for the blind community, but the elderly and, you know, everyone. It's becoming, I don't know how the rest of the crew feels, but it's becoming a new standard practice. And it's not that expensive to do it, you know? So I hope that in the next few years, all of us start implementing it more at the beginning.
Hello.
Hi, yes, we have some new users to LinkedIn audio right now. So I'm just going to provide some guidance.
Hello, ma'am, I have doubt.
Quick question, Apple. Can you please introduce yourself quickly and then ask your question?
मैम ये ऐप के बारे में मुझे ट्यूशन सर ने बताया लिंक्ड.
It should be in English because most of our audience members communicate in English.
The app tell me for tuition teacher. Hello?
Yeah, we're not able to understand you. Let's try again at another time, okay? I'm so sorry. It is a little bit difficult when you first land in LinkedIn audio to be able to navigate the system. It's okay. That's part of learning, and that's what we're here for, right? So I appreciate everyone's candor and courage to come here and speak their minds and add to the conversation. So with that, I want to turn over the mic to Scott, Taya, and Michael, who haven't had a chance to add yet to this conversation. Michael?
Thanks, Sophie. I think those of us who are co-moderators here, we obviously have reached out to literally hundreds of individuals to invite them, and every now and then we're going to have somebody who wants to participate but is having some difficulty. So thank you for handling that. This topic is really critical here, and what Kristin and her family have done is lending so much more depth and understanding to the fact that while we talk often about, we call it JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, the reality is that among that diversity and inclusion question is this whole category of individuals who are in some way impaired and perhaps unaccessible to the clinical trial network, if you will. So I think today's conversation, while it's only scraping the surface here, is really to help highlight what's happening with the need to make sure that, in this case, sight-impaired individuals who are equally at risk for things, if not more so, for things such as large general indication diseases such as diabetes and cardiovascular complications, arthritis, etc. But also, you think about individuals who are in the orphan disease or the rare disease category, where having a sight-impaired scenario makes life just so much more difficult. So part of what we were trying to do today here on Clinical Trials OBQ is just to really highlight this and get people thinking more about how do we help these individuals participate in clinical trials. So thanks for the time to talk briefly about that.
Fantastic. And Scott, I know you have some pearls of wisdom to add here.
Thanks, Sophie. Well, I wanted to first thank Kristin and Jennifer for kicking us off and, bravely stepping up and helping educate us a little bit on the visually impaired and reminding us that it really is a spectrum. I think there's a couple threads here. I wanted to make a comment, and maybe I can try to turn this into a question as well. I've spent a fair amount of time thinking about the burden of clinical trial participation and how to reduce some of the barriers to enrolling in a clinical trial. As many of you are aware, for lots and lots of people and lots of different disease states, standard of care is not good enough. And sometimes patients' only hope is the opportunity to participate in a clinical trial and access a new, potentially improved or curative therapy. So the idea that clinical research can become a care option, or CRACO as we call it, is a real thing that's in front of us. How do we merge the artificial, sometimes administratively burdensome sort of part of clinical research and merge that into healthcare in general? And some of the things we've been working on are understanding what are those burdens, and let's make sure we're thinking about things for children, or we're thinking about things for the elderly, or we're thinking about participants that may have a caregiver with them. And I think we've also spent a fair amount of time on the JEDI topic about thinking about equity and inclusion. So this process, this long journey we're on of beginning to make sure clinical trials are accessible to all, it's a really fantastic sort of focus here of digging into the visually impaired as sort of a subset a little bit of a group that has maybe some special considerations we need to be thinking about. In an ideal world, we go forward with clinical trials that could be hybrid or remote. You could have a site visit, participate from home. Maybe there's an e-consent. Maybe there's an audio consent. Maybe there's a paper consent. So I think the challenge for a lot of us, regulators, operators, operational folks, is how do we continue to make clinical trials customized in a way that, depending on anybody's individual circumstance, where they live, the color of their skin, do they have internet access, can they see, how do we start to make clinical trials to where whoever you are can participate, and we can somehow kind of customize participation to fit around what everyone's maybe individual circumstances are. True equity, true access, true inclusion. So it's kind of a big topic, and I feel like there's so much work to be done on this. I was wondering maybe turning this back to Jennifer and Kristin, thinking about some of your experiences in ophthalmology, and Kristin thinking about your experience with your sons. We talked a little bit about the consent process, but what are some other things we should be thinking about to be able to make things for someone to almost have like a cafeteria menu of things they could choose from if they need a particular have a particular special circumstance or need something that would help them participate?
Go ahead, Kristin. They hear a lot from me.
Well, look, I would say I love everything that you were just talking about, Scott. And I would say that one of the bottom line, the thread that should be in all of your planning, all of your thinking is this one question: how can I help you be successful? How address the person specifically, but how can I help you be successful? And I would also add this. I would actually challenge you all, or call to action for you all to consider this. Have people with disabilities on your teams, because they are, my dogs are going crazy. Sorry.
I was waiting for that, Kristin. Thank you.
Yeah, have them with disabilities on team, because here's the thing. My sons and the people that I work with that are successful without sight, they are extraordinary problem solvers. They are incredibly creative thinkers just by practice since they were born, right? The stuff that my boys can think outside the box is absolutely, it blows my mind half the time. So I would say start there. Get people with disabilities on your clinical trial design teams.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that.
I was going to add something just as follow-up from this week's movie thing. For me, I'd never been around so many people with varying levels, as I think Scott had said or someone said, on the spectrum of visual impairment. So one of the guys that came up, right, can't remember his name right now. Was it Pat? He came up from South Carolina. He had his dog. The dog came later. And when I was driving home, I saw him with his guide dog. Now, he was not completely blind. He was walking through a town he'd never been in, all by himself, with his dog, trying to find a place for the dog, to pee. And I was like, oh, should I help him, or do I need to? Is he okay? So I found it so intriguing. And some of these people were bolting up and down steps. So I think it's a lot of what you're saying, that it's very individualized, right? What people need. And so I think it's talking to the people directly. What can I do to make this more easy for you?
Right? Tailoring it, tailored to individual needs. Thank you, Jennifer. With that, I want to pass the mic to Taya, who hasn't had a chance to speak yet, and then Vaishnavi Bale, who has joined us from the audience and courageously come up to the stage, and I'm sure she has something great to share with us. So Taya, take it away, and then Vaishnavi.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you for hosting this conversation. Kristin, it's been really interesting to hear your perspective. I think from a clinical research mindset, we all go to ophthalmology trials or things that would involve sight. But what about just general inclusion in every kind of trial that we have? What are things that you see as barriers to opening up? And I'll say, from my perspective, we don't take into consideration people that have limited vision in any of the documentation or consenting process, and that is a huge barrier. Are there other barriers that you're seeing? We mentioned transport, but something that maybe we would never have thought of that firsthand.
I love that question. Here's one thing to consider. When there's this technique with blindness called sighted guide, and all you do is come to the person. Say a blind patient is entering your facility. You just come to that person and say, would you like me to walk sighted guide with you? And they will tell you whether they're going to hold your elbow or your shoulder. Some blind people like to be a half step behind you. Some like to be next to you. My middle child he tries to be 3 steps ahead of me. That doesn't always work. But it's a technique where they'll either take your elbow or your shoulder and you walk together. And just doing that, not having to have that person navigate a facility, they can absolutely, most, successful blind people are extremely independent. But again, it's that bandwidth issue. Plus, it gives you that opportunity. I said in my TED Talk, having to be a sighted guide for my boys their whole lives, the relationship that we've built is unbelievable. And you get time when you get to be that sighted guide walking the patient through the facility, you get time to get to know them and engage them more. And we all know that, getting patients engaged in our projects and our trials it's a huge challenge. And this offers an opportunity to get that person, build that relationship, and keep them engaged.
I love that. That reminds me of when I used to do running, and we would have volunteers that would run alongside visually impaired. So I think that's great. Thank you.
Fantastic. That was a great addition. And next, let's hear from Vaishnavi, who has been patiently waiting to provide her insight. Go ahead, Vaishnavi. Can you unmute and join us? Okay, again, here's the learning curve when it comes to LinkedIn audio. There are some barriers that we're still working on, and that's perfectly fine. As an example, we have Janae Miller, who has asked to speak right from the beginning. She is blind, and she has a lot to add, but I'm unable to bring her to the stage, and she's unable to see what restrictions are there to allow me to bring her to the stage. So here's an example. Maybe LinkedIn can help us out by increasing access. So that's there's another thing there. So I think we have come close to the end of our time. I'd love to hear some closing remarks from everyone. I'm going to have Scott lead that for us. And I'd like to just say I'm learning so much from each of you just listening, because each of us have a different perspective. It's hard. It's difficult to put ourselves in the shoes of someone who has any disability, and visually impaired people have a very unique perspective. So taking the effort to put ourselves in their shoes, and I love the idea of bringing someone to your team who is visually impaired, because that's the best way to have that empathy, right? So let's start with that. Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Sophie. And again, a huge thank you to Jennifer and Kristin for taking time to kind of lead our discussion and remind all of us that this kind of important topic that maybe a lot of people are unaware of, or maybe even forget, we need that reminder around visual impairment, and that it is a spectrum, and let's consider that constituent that needs to have access, that we need to think about options for them to join as well. So again, going back to kind of the area I tend to focus on is really purely clinical development, and how do we make clinical trials, patient friendly? How do we think about our ultimate stakeholders? And back to what I think, Sophie, you said early, not only is it the right thing to do, but it's good science for us to be inclusive and ensuring that we have a broad representation, not only from scientific purposes, but also so that, again, people can access treatments kind of wherever they are and whatever their situation looks like. So I'm kind of making notes here of the take-home message from Kristin of, what's one step we can take? How can we be a little bit more solution-oriented? Let's make sure that in our clinical trials, we include, as part of an advisory panel, patients, for example, that can represent a variety of different scenarios. Maybe we have visually impaired. Maybe we need to think about someone who's not fully mobile. Maybe there's an auditory, limited hearing component as well. We also deal with a lot of rare orphan diseases where there could be intellectual disabilities, or again, caregivers, parents, children involved. We're often talking about not just a patient, but it's often kind of an entire family and a support network to kind of help make this happen. So kind of one of my big takeaways today here is, let's make sure we have audience, our constituents, our ultimate stakeholders involved, and that we're remembering their perspective and helping them kind of teach us maybe what we could do, how we can remove those barriers, and how we can make clinical trials more accessible really for everyone. So again, thank you, Jennifer and Kristin, for kind of leading our discussion and reminding us how important this is for us to keep in mind.
Kristin, I think we're gonna thank you, Scott. Sorry. We're gonna give it back to you so you can kind of have more of the closing comments. But one of the things I want to, if you could touch on, or you might want to touch on something else. But one of the conversations I had this week was about different people that understand that we could hire to bring on board, that are almost like consultants, that will test things out and make things easier, especially I think when it comes to these diaries and these patient-reported outcomes that we use. So I wonder, and that kind of comes back to the topic that Edye was saying, with having someone at an IRB level that understands the challenges. So I don't know what that happens if we bring them on earlier as a consultant, or just having someone on board that can kind of test out the tools that we might want to implement. So I hand it back to you, to Kristin, for any final remarks. I think we do have about a little less than 10 minutes, but feel free to share anything else you might like to.
Yeah, I mean, a consultant is a phenomenal idea. I will come back to the ultimate in the Kristin Smedley Has a Dream world. The ultimate is to have people, like I said, with disabilities on your teams, not even just as advisors or consultants. Literally, think about the team that you work with. You have somebody with a disability on that team also. This is what my whole film is about. You literally get the competitive edge because of all that they bring to the table, that when all things are equal, when access is in place, they just have skills that are a little above the rest of us, simply because of the way that their life has been. And then the second thing I would add as a challenge, as a priority, is, we hear inclusive design, but when you think about, because I know probably some of you listening are a little overwhelmed, but oh my gosh, I got to think about the hearing impaired, the sight impaired. When you think about what it is that your role is in the organization, in your team, and what you need to produce, all it really takes is you think about, how can I make it as accessible as possible for as many people as possible? So instead of one-offing, I'm going to make sure that the sight impaired can do this, and the one and this and this and this, make it a complete picture as much as you can, and think about that everybody can access it, then everyone benefits. There's an interesting, you should look up the TED Talk of Chris Downey, Downey. He's an architect that was extremely successful as an architect. And he went blind with a medical procedure to save his life, happened to nick his optic nerve, and he woke up completely blind, but alive, right? And everyone was ready they took away his cell phone, they took everything in the hospital, and he said, whoa. I still have a job, I still have to make a living, and they didn't think he could be an architect anymore. Within a month of going completely blind, he went back to work as an architect. He is more successful now than before he went blind. And I interviewed him for my book, and he literally said to me, Kristin, I have 19 minutes. I'm like, holy crap, I can't even say hello in 19 minutes. But he is so successful now. And his TED Talk is about, he consults with cities and towns about designing it and thinking about a blind person. Designing it for access for the blind actually enhances everyone else's experience. And this is what this is how he got his job at Disney. He said the same thing. He's now working with Disney in the parks of, when you think about making this accessible for a blind person, it actually enhances the experience for everybody else. So consider that, not that this is, I don't want you to think about this as, oh my God, this is overwhelming. Think about when you're designing the trials and the work that you do, thinking about access for the blind, it really does give everybody else a better experience. And I would also add that as much as you can do to engage and support the community you serve in advance of asking them to come into a clinical trial is going to pay you dividends that are huge in the outcomes. Because the more you can support, this is what I did with Spark Therapeutics. They said, no one's really, a pharmaceutical comes in and says, well, we want you on a clinical trial for what is now Luxturna, but no one was saying, hey, the blind community could use a portal with some stories of people succeeding without sight, with some caretaker stories of the challenges of being a parent of a blind child. Anything you can do on the front end to support the communities you serve is tremendous.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Kristin. That sheds so much light, and you describe it so well. I feel like, how can we hire someone on my team today to get someone that we can move this needle forward. So with that, I really want to thank all of the audience members who joined us today, Maria and Carolyn and Dion and Chinene and Tracy, David, Jess, Hillary, Melanie, Arthi, Yusuf, Keith, Elizabeth, Lanyu, Pili, Jennifer, Amethyst, Shweta, Rishma, Siddhant, Mr. Kader, Kadri, Joseph, Malcolm, Claire, Dr. Rashid, Arun, Fong Tran, thank you for joining us. I know you have a very, very busy schedule. I appreciate you. Tabo, Claria, Nicholas, Carrie, and Diana. We appreciate each and every one of you. And now I want to turn it over to Michael for our closing remarks.
Sophie, thank you so much, and amazing moderation today. It's so difficult to keep a large group of folks going like this, and I just want to point out that, the topic that we've talked about today with sight impairment and engagement in clinical trials, and really navigating just the world in general, brings up the fact that this is a world conversation. And I will tell you, in our audience here, we have people joining from multiple countries. I just got off a text discussion with someone who literally started the conversation in part of the Philippines and is now in Tokyo. So we are so grateful for the engagement that Clinical Trials One Burning Question is engaging, and we are very, very grateful and encourage all of you to join the LinkedIn group. I have managed over the course of this hour here to reach out with a personal message to over 50 individuals, and please join us there. All of the archived conversations and discussions will be there, as well as many other links to things that will be important and helpful to you in your interaction with the clinical trial world. So on behalf of the terrific co-moderators that I so screwed up on introductions in the beginning, I really, really thank everybody for joining, and this has been a real pleasure here. I'd ask any of our other co-mods if they have things that they would like to add now, please do so, and if not, then Sophie, I'll have you take us out here as we are nearing, as we try to promise to stay on track with an hour's worth of conversation. Thanks again.
All right, I think we are ready to wrap up. So in closing, again, I'm Sophie Yohanan, and I'm the host for this session. We will have a new session every month, and the next one is going to be in the end of May. Please look out for our summary post after this discussion with a link to the archival. Taya is archiving all of our conversations. It will also be posted in the LinkedIn group that Michael mentioned, the OBQ One Burning Question LinkedIn group, and you can request admission for membership into the group simply by messaging one of us or by clicking on the link to the group and requesting admission. So that's where everything will be archived, all of our links, all of our discussion, learning points, as well as the recording from Taya. So thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next month.